Okay, it looks like we are up to our usual complement plus a few extras. So although we're going to jump right into it, if there's anyone around the room that you don't know or have seen but don't know their names, then as we are beginning a whole new cycle of Torah, make sure that you begin it on the right foot by knowing the other students in the class. So once we're done, please get to know each other a little bit, say hi, and try not to hold any of your arguments against each other. Remember, it's a machloket l'shem shamayim, an argument for the sake of heaven is a beautiful thing. Okay, where are we?
Beginning.
In the beginning! In the beginning. We are all the way back as we just have celebrated Simchat Torah. So we've just celebrated the completion and re-beginning of the cycle of reading the Torah. That must mean we're back at the beginning of the book. So we are back in Parashat Bereishit, the book of Genesis, which talks about what? Creation, the beginning of everything, quite literally, time, space, and everything that goes along with it. And that's a big topic, which, as usual, means we're not going to handle all of it. We're going to talk about a particular slice, and a particular slice that causes a great deal of controversy, a great deal of discussion, of debate, both within Judaism and outside the bounds of Judaism, because it is often considered a theological turning point for humanity. We're talking, of course, about the what?
The apple.
Doesn't say apple.
The fruit.
The fruit. So, as a case in point, it has become customary within most Jewish communities as well as within the Christian world to describe the fruit that was eaten in the Garden of Eden as an apple, even though the word apple does not appear anywhere in this story. So, what I want to point out is, as we go through this story, is that we have our understanding of this chapter of Genesis very, very colored by our cultural and personal feelings, backgrounds, theology, society, etc. But let's see if we can actually try and not set that aside, but recognize when we're relying on it as we try to understand it. So, who are the main characters in this story of fruit? Okay, so we have Adam, and we have Chava. We're going to call her Chava rather than Eve, because it's her actual name. Any other characters? What's that? Well, we're going to call him Snake because that's shorter.
Okay.
Therefore, it's easier to write. What's that? And easier to spell as well than serpent. Yes, exactly. Nachash is even easier, but we'll go ahead and translate that word. So we've got Adam, Chava, Snake, and God. Snake? What? How many biblical stories have an animal as a central character? I'm not talking about, the animal that was sacrificed. I mean, an actual character. What's that? How many? Well, tell me. Give me another example of a biblical story with an animal as a character. The donkey of Bil'am. The donkey of Bil'am. The so-called talking donkey. The what?
The whale.
What whale?
The
The fish. Yeah. There's no apple in the garden and there's no whale in Jonah. There's a fish. Okay, so we got a fish. I know we immediately leap to whale because it makes it somehow more digestible to imagine Jonah being eaten by a whale than it is to be eaten by a fish. But it doesn't say whale, it says fish. Okay, anyone else? Any others? That pretty much runs the gamut. I mean, animals make many, many appearances as poetic metaphors and as backdrops to many things. You have horses and chariots, and you have the cows for the slaughter, you have the goats for the scapegoat of Yom Kippur. You've got animals galore all over the place. What's that? And you have the animals in the ark, indeed. And by the way, how many animals on the ark? Of each species?
Two male and female.
Well, two each of some species.
Two each of some.
There were more than that of the ones that get sacrificed.
And plus seven pairs of clean animals. So to say animals that would have been fit for sacrifice, or at least were fit for being eaten under the laws of kashrut. So you actually ended up not just with twosies by twosies, but you ended up with twosies by twosies plus sevenses and sevenses. But that comes from actually reading the text carefully, rather than just looking at the children's picture book. Okay, so we're going to talk an awful lot about the snake today. Because why is this snake so important? What makes him such a central character?
He's the one who influenced.
He's the one who influences, he tempts, he's the one that convinces Chava to eat the fruit in the first place, right? So understanding who or what this is kind of important to understanding the whole theology behind the story. So what are some options for the snake that you just happen to already know ahead of time? Don't worry, we'll tear them apart and build them up again when you start learning, but how has the snake been variously identified beyond just the word snake?
He has a plan.
He's got a plan. Okay, so we have one thing is that he is a character in and of himself, but we can call him a plotter, right? That this is a character that's different than just your run-of-the-mill garden snake, but that it has cunning and intrigue and this ability to plot and scheme to cause something to happen, and his exact motivations are subject to a lot of debate. But assuming no supernatural identity to the snake, it has been variously suggested that the snake was trying to seduce Chava, that the snake was after her as a mate. This is from the Bavli, from the Talmud, and wanted to get rid of Adam and take his place, more or less. And others simply saw the snake as trying to be king of everything. He wanted to lord it over all. After all, he was the most cunning of all creatures. We're going to find out in just a second. So he was a plotter, a grasper, a social climber. He was the guy going up the corporate ladder. And man was the next step, the next rung to go up. Any other identifications for the snake? No one wants to say the S word?
Satan, of course.
Hasatan, the adversary.
Oh.
Right? Hasatan. Well, first of all, remember, Satan is a Hebrew word. It's not a proper name until much later in theology, but it is a Hebrew word that simply means adversary. And what role then would Satan be playing in this play, in this story? What would that character's motivation be? Wants to annoy God, wants to upset God's perfect order, wants to create sin, wants to perpetuate a distance between God's creation and God, wants to form a breach between husband and wife. All these, evil, cackling, not self-motivated, but in support of evil as an abstract concept, ideals, right? The plotter snake is just, out for himself. The Satan snake is out for the good of evil, right? Like the good of evil, yeah, that's a bumper sticker.
Yeah.
For the good of evil. Any other possibility identifiers for the snake? A deceiver, a trickster, but that would sort of fall under the plotter idea there.
How does that all fit together when God created everything,
Mhm.
Adam and Eve and the Garden of Eden? And did he create the snake? And if so, couldn't he predict what the snake was going to do?
Well, yeah, that is a little bit of a problem. Both the snake as well as Adam and Chava as well. Didn't God know, sticking them down next to this tree, that there was going to be a problem? I mean, why not put the tree inside of a greenhouse and lock the door? Didn't God know what was going to happen? And we'll come back to the question of responsibility and culpability and punishments when we get to the end of the chapter. But the snake, as a feature of creation, could just be an animal, right? I mean, we were assigning all sorts of shrewd plotting and scheming, or supernatural, miraculous, evil desire and ability. Couldn't the snake simply be an animal?
Well, if he actually talked, it's not quite a normal animal.
Well, there are definitely certain problems, and actually the snake doesn't slither in the story, because after all, one of the punishments the snake gets is being forced to slither on his belly for the rest of his life, which would imply that if that's a punishment, that he weren't slithering before. Does that make sense? You can't punish something by simply carrying it on, at least that's the theory. So therefore, if the snake has to crawl on its belly now, prior to its transgression, it must not have been crawling on its belly. It must have been walking around on legs. These are like.
Rabbi, we know that any spiritual forces within man has to go and ask permission to God to present any type of temptation to us.
So,
Did the snake ask permission?
well, we don't get any clear statements of that, but it does open up another option, which is, rather than a Satan figure looking out for evil, perhaps this was simply an angel. An angel, right? A messenger of God, like the angel that opened up the mouth of Bilam's donkey and opened the mouth of the snake to do God's will. Any problems with that theory?
Was it God's will that she eat the apple?
Yeah, well, doesn't that mean that God wanted them to eat the apple then? Or fruit? See, you got me saying it. Doesn't that mean that God wanted them to eat the fruit? And if so, is it right to punish them for doing what God had miraculously orchestrated to happen? Okay, so these are all the different ideas, and we may even come across a few more that we need to consider as we're reading through the story of chapter 3. That's the cue to open up the Humashim. So we're on page 17. Right at the bottom of the actual Torah translation text. Who would like to give us their best Genesis voice rendition of chapter 3? Mariam, you got your hand up first, I think.
The two of them were naked, the man and his wife, yet they felt no shame. Now the serpent was the shrewdest of all the wild beasts that the Lord God had made.
By the way, that's again, we're reading carefully here. What's the characteristic of the serpent that makes him stand out? Shrewd compared to what?
All the wild beasts.
Okay, all the wild beasts. Does that make him as smart as man? Does that make him smarter than man? Does that make him equal to man? Less than man? Something to think about. We're not going to come to a conclusion right now, but we often portray, once we say the snake is the shrewdest of all the wild beasts, literally all the beasts of the field, we often portray the snake, therefore, as being unequal to man and being clever, or even more clever. After all, he tricks Chava, right? So therefore, he must be a pretty sharp customer. But that's not necessarily true. It doesn't say the snake was the shrewdest of all creatures. It's the shrewdest of all beasts of the field. So
But
let's.
it does imply that other beasts were shrewd.
It doesn't imply other beasts also had some measure of intelligence, but of all of them, the snake seems to have been superior compared to them.
Is shrewd a compliment or an insult, you think here?
It's a play on the word for naked.
Ah, okay.
So there are many different words for describing intelligence, but if you look over at the very end of chapter 2, verse 25, which Marian read for us, it says that they are arumim, that they are naked, and then in the very first verse of chapter 3, it says that the nachash is arum. And it's a play on the fact that the word for naked and shrewd are, what's the right word in English? Homonyms. That they are two words that sound identical. So it's a specific choice of word in order to highlight their innocence and his cunning. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right. So,
Did God really say, "You shall not eat of any tree of the garden"?
all right. Now, we didn't have a chance to read together from chapters 1 and 2, but hopefully you've done your homework and been reading privately. Did God say not to eat of any tree of the garden? To whom? Well, there's only two people that God could be talking to.
To Adam, not to Eve.
Well, we do know initially that there was only a discussion to Adam, although there was also a statement in the first chapter where it seems to be speaking to both of them. And that's also a subject of debate and discussion of who really got the command from God. But whoever got the command, did the command say, don't eat anything from a tree? No. What did the actual command say? Eat everything except this one. Everything was fine, and indeed vegetarians often point to those early verses in chapters 1 and 2 as proof that we should be vegetarians. But it seems to be that the snake is deliberately putting out a false statement in order to get Eve in conversation with him, right? So, God said you guys can't eat from trees. No, he didn't say that. And now we're talking. Make sense? Sort of the same way that a mugger might ask you what time is it to get you to stop and begin talking before they rob you. It's, you got to get their attention, get them stopped, and then you can do things.
Maybe you're going to discuss this later.
Mhm.
I have a problem understanding when God says to have he said that he's going to create us to his image, knowing the good and the bad. So is this plan part of the plot of God to...
Let's get through the whole
Yeah.
fruit scene and talk about the punishments, and we might get some of that, but that's not going to be the primary focus of the discussion, because that's another major subject that deserves its own class.
Okay.
But maybe we can discuss that more privately. Okay, so the snake begins with this wonderful dummy question in order to get the conversation going.
The woman replied to the serpent, "You may eat of the fruit of the other trees of the garden. It is only about fruit of the tree in the middle of the garden that God said, you shall not eat of it or touch it lest you die."
Okay, so she answers very, very carefully and very confidently, no, 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 no. God just said, don't eat from this tree. Everything else was fine. Make sense? And now that she's already mentioned it, he can begin to work on her.
And the serpent said to the woman, "You are not going to die, but God knows that as soon as you eat of it, your eyes will be opened and you will be like divine beings who know good and bad." When the woman
There, we're going to let that slide. That you will be Elohim, that you will be like either divine beings or like God's self, depending upon the way you want to translate the word Elohim, which can be translated in both varieties and is used throughout the Tanakh to mean both things. That you'll have your eyes opened if you eat this fruit. Sound good? And that you'll know good and bad. That's
It's kind of truth, but it's a figurative.
Well, we often blame this snake for being the tempter, right? The seducer. Big deal. I mean, why? Who would be seduced by this? We offer classes all the time to help people understand good and bad, and to know what Torah says and to know what not to do in life. And although we have a pretty good showing, it's not like they're beating down our doors to come and learn. I mean, is really the offer of a basic moral education something that is so seductive and tempting that we would imagine everyone would fall for it? Usually when you seduce somebody, right, you're seducing them with something that appeals to their basic animal, passions or greed or self-interest. Knowledge of good and bad? What does Adam and Eve need knowledge of good and bad for? I mean, they're walking around naked, happy, eating off all the other trees. I mean, they're set. You wanted to offer them, some super tasty fruit. That might get them interested. But knowledge of good and evil, they don't even know what good and evil is, let alone having specific knowledge of what is good and what is evil. How is this tempting?
Maybe they know the snake is tempting them.
Well, maybe because someone's trying to sell it, it must be good.
Mm-hmm.
Because otherwise, why is he interested in getting us to eat this?
Right.
Interesting hypothesis.
To be godlike and have God's power, maybe?
Maybe it's the Elohim. What is it that comes with the knowledge of good and evil? Maybe it makes me God-like. And, looking around at what God has done, if I could do that too, maybe that would be pretty good. Right? So the question would be, if they weren't being tempted by knowledge of good and evil, but were being tempted by the idea that somehow knowledge of good and evil would make them godly, that may have been the more tempting aspect. Does that make sense? But remember, when we're reading this, we have to try and figure out what was the actual temptation. They had plenty to eat, they were well taken care of, and they had no examples of evil or wrongdoing from anyone else to follow or to mimic. And there doesn't seem to be, at least on surface reading, any specific benefit to eating this fruit that's going to make their lives any better. So what is the leverage for temptation?
But there's no indication that it will make their lives worse either. Because when the serpent talks, the snake talks about opening, being able to see good and evil, in her innocence, Hava may not realize that this is doing it. This would give her anything but more information, more knowledge.
Except, thou shalt not eat. In terms of the drawback of eating this fruit,
God said not to.
God gave them one command, and what was the punishment for violating that one command? What the stated punishment? Death. So whatever the temptation is, the temptation has to be big enough that she's willing to risk death. And at the moment, remember, she's 50% of the world's population. She has to be willing to risk death because the temptation is too great.
Yeah, well, the snake awoke the curiosity. Because they don't have that curiosity or malice before.
How do we know? Does it say they don't?
It's like when a parent says to a kid, don't do that, they do it.
Well, you've clearly met my son.
Psychology.
What's that?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, it is certainly true that warnings can often draw people's attention. The big shiny red sign that says danger is often an invitation to many of us. Or where it says, no unauthorized access. We wonder what's behind the door. But I think most of us have also experienced a certain amount of curiosity or interest without that. I mean, I was taking apart my toys and such as soon as I could hold a screwdriver because I just wanted to see how they worked. And it wasn't because my family told me not to. It was just the natural curiosity. So yes and no. Certainly warnings can create curiosity, but I think we are gifted or cursed with a certain level of curiosity even without that. Interestingly to point out, according to rabbinic reading of the grammar between chapters 3 and chapter 4, there's an understanding from Judaism at least, and I do believe the grammar supports it quite well, that sexual curiosity had already been awakened before any fruit was eaten. That is to say that Adam and Chava had already been intimate before any fruit came down off that tree. So that level of curiosity, at least, they were already getting on quite fine with. So they were already experimenting in some ways.
But he tempted her with divinity.
It seems to be, if we're going to say that she was willing to risk death, that the only sizable thing that he mentions here that could have been significant enough to risk death would have been to be godlike, right? To be godlike. And by the way, is the serpent wrong? Is the snake lying about what they get when they eat it? No, he's absolutely right. We gained knowledge of good and evil, and we gained a godlike ability. We gained the ability to choose what we would do. And we gained the ability to transform the world. That wasn't me. So the snake may be tempting, but he's not lying. And what he promises does come to pass. Maybe not the way Adam and Chava thought it was going to come to pass. Maybe they thought they were going to, get lightning bolts out of the fingertips or something else for God-like, although we've never seen God act that way at this point in the story of creation yet. Still, in the end, the promise of the snake was true. We did learn to be able to choose between good and evil. We usually choose wrong, but we did learn that we could choose, and we have learned how to reshape the world and cause and to give creation to new generations of humanity, as well as creation to all sorts of other aspects of the globe.
Where would the story have gone if she hadn't eaten the fruit?
Well,
They would be there forever, happy.
I mean, that's the other problem, is that, if they hadn't eaten that fruit, we would have had like 1,000 pages of blank.
It
So
had to go this way.
they had to go that way, exactly. The fruit was going to get eaten. So we know that, and quite probably we can argue that God knew that that was going to happen as well. But the lessons of the story are still applicable to us, even if the historical event, if we can call it that, and we'll argue about that in a bit,
We could say that God
was going to
wanted
happen.
We could say that God actually planned it to happen.
And then we're going to have to wonder about the punishments. Okay, let's go ahead and finish up our story so we can begin dissecting it. In more detail, I mean.
When the woman saw that the tree was good for eating and a delight to the eyes, and that the tree was desirable as a source of wisdom, she took of its fruit and ate. She also gave some to her husband, and he ate. Then the eyes of both of them were opened, and they perceived that they were naked, and they sewed together fig leaves and made themselves loincloths.
Okay. Everything the snake promised came to pass, and now they are naked and know that they're naked. Before, of course, they were naked and didn't realize it. Now they are, and now we've got some fig leaves. Okay? How are we doing?
Do you find that unusual?
Did they find it unusual? Well,
Why did they want to cover themselves up?
Well, because apparently they were beginning to judge for themselves what was good and what was bad. And they were beginning to think that just walking around naked wasn't a good thing. So we better cover these things up. Just the two of them, indeed. And, there are plenty of couples that still don't let each other see each other naked in the privacy of their own home either. We can argue about whether that's good or bad another time. But it's not an unusual phenomenon. It's not unusual. But what is unusual here is they're not dead.
Right.
It is like,
I mean, if you eat it, you'll die. We might have thought, and we could be easily excused for thinking, that when God said, if you eat it, you'll die, he meant right away. You eat it, you die. It's like poison, right? You eat rat poison, you die. If I say that to someone, they understand that while eating it, you are going to feel sick, and then you are going to be lying down, and you're not getting up again. Here, does not seem to be what's happening. They're eating it, and they're not dead. Why not?
Maybe they understood that what God's meant when he says you will die eventually.
There was an implied eventually.
There was no time frame.
There was no time frame specified. We might have inserted mentally the idea into the warning that the timing would be sudden and immediate. The Snow White syndrome. You take a bite from the fruit, in that movie an apple, you fall over dead, or in her case asleep because it was only a little bite. Here, it seems that God's killing of them is in check. Note, however, that what seems to be coming along here is the development of the notion of time for tshuva, that there was time for repentance. And that's going to become even more apparent with God's conversation with them. Go ahead, Mary.
They heard the sound of the Lord God moving about in the garden at the breezy time of the day. And the man and his wife hid from the Lord God among the trees of the garden.
Keep going.
The Lord God called out to the man and said to him, "Where are you?" He replied, "I heard the sound of you in the garden, and I was afraid because I was naked, so I hid." Then he asked, "Who told you that you were naked?"
And of course, realizing that there's no one around to tell them, God continues with the second obvious explanation.
"Did you eat of the tree from which I have forbidden you to eat? The man said,
Up. All right. Did you eat? Adam, you're under oath and on the stand. Did you eat from the tree that I forbade? The answer should be yes. Instead, his answer is
the woman you put at my side, she gave me of the tree and I ate.
she made me do it.
He was not honest.
He was not honest. They hid from God, and when asked, he immediately tries to wriggle out of personal responsibility. He does not do tshuva. He does not repent. And as we're going to see, neither does she. Keep going.
And the Lord God said to the woman, what is this you have done? The woman replied, the serpent duped me, and I ate. Then the Lord God said to the serpent,
Who doesn't get a question. So the woman is told, why'd you do this? And she says, he did it, meaning the snake, or it did it. So neither Adam nor Chava take responsibility for what they have done, for which they, along with the snake, are going to be punished. So let's go ahead and hear what the punishments will be.
because you did this, more cursed shall you be than all cattle and all the wild beasts.
Now, wild beasts, again, is echoing the phrase at the very beginning, right? Because at the beginning, he was arum. He was shrewder than all the beasts of the field, right? All the chayat hasadeh. Now he is, so this is in the middle of verse 14, arur. And there's a certain assonance between arum and arur. He is cursed. He was arum shrewd, now he is arur cursed. We got that? So it's just part of the literary structure and poetry of the Hebrew, which doesn't quite come out in the English.
On your belly shall you crawl, the dirt shall you eat, all the days of your life. I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and hers. They shall strike at your head, and you shall strike at their heel.
Okay, so snake's punishments are crawl in your stomach from now on, eating dirt, and we can argue whether it's literally you're going to eat dirt or whether it's just a description of how low you will be. Sort of like the eat my dust metaphor in English doesn't actually mean we expect you to take a spoonful of my dust and eat it. It just means you'll be left in the dust. So perhaps the eating of the dirt is just meant you'll be the lowest of the low. And you and humanity, or the offspring of the women, which is humanity, are going to be enemies forever. Now, don't tell that to people who have pet snakes. And the woman?
And to the woman he said, I will make most severe your pangs in childbearing. In pain shall you bear children. Yet your urge shall be for your husband, and he shall rule over you.
I often misquoted line there. I've always found it rather striking that the communities which like to use the line that he shall rule over you as an excuse for male dominance within a family or within a society neglect to mention the fact that that's only half of that phrase. And that in fact the ruling over you part is specifically trying to explain why it is that a woman who suffers pain in childbirth has desire for sex. Because you would think things that hurt you are the kind of things you would avoid, right? And nevertheless, what is being explained here is despite the pain of childbirth, which is really the only, in quote, curse that the woman is getting here, despite those pains, she is still going to have the same normal desires for sexual intimacy that will eventually lead to those pains. And the ruling over you is nothing to do with him ruling her, ordering her about, forcing her to do things against her will or anything like that. It has to do with the fact that he can stand there and strike a pose and she'll go soft at the knees, and 9 months later she's going to be screaming in pain. And the idea of female sexuality as being a normal, passionate, and yet illogical thing, given the pain that comes 9 months later, is what's being explained here, not male domination. Make sense? Okay. But we're not done yet.
To Adam he said, because you did as your wife said, and ate of the tree about which I commanded you, you shall not eat of it. Cursed be the ground because of you. By toil shall you eat of it all the days of your life. Thorns and thistles shall it sprout for you, but your food shall be the grasses of the field. By the sweat of your brow shall you get bread to eat, until you return to the ground, for from it you were taken. For dust you are, and to dust you shall return.
Okay, so what's the curse for Adam?
Hard work.
You shall eat the grasses.
Hard work. Hard work, and all of your work is going to produce just grass, which later, of course, humanity learns to do what with? Cook.
Food, right.
Cook. Because we're not the kind of animal that just chews grass. We take the grasses of the field, the wheat, the barley, the rye and spelt and oats and all those things, and we learn how to create food with it that is superior to its natural state. But that's hard work.
Before this happened,
Mm-hmm.
there was no talk of death.
Except as a warning, yes.
It was a threat, sort of, or a warning. But if they had not partaken of the fruit, would they have lived forever? And this punishment
Mm-hmm.
of women having hard pain, and
Right.
men working hard,
Right.
and then going back to the dust, is the first we've heard about death and burial and so forth.
Yes.
Now, before that, what was God's
What was the plan?
Yeah.
Well, welcome to a very contentious point of discussion. There are those that argue, as you seem to be leaning towards, that there was no mention of death, and the punishment mentions death. Therefore, one of the punishments is death. And there are others that argue, no, man would have died eventually as well. After all, the fish, the birds, and all the other animals of the field, they didn't do anything with this fruit, and yet they died. So clearly death is not a punishment, but a natural result of living. And we should only understand and hear the irony that we will earn our life from the dirt, and that when we will die, we will return to the dirt. And that is something uniquely human, the way we have to work the earth. Again, modern world notwithstanding, where most of us, in this country at least, have no connection to the dirt. In the ancient world, the irony would have been very, very bitter. That you spend your entire life digging in the earth to try and get life out of it, and sweating and breaking your back in the process, and yet at the end of your life, you get put back into it. That would have been very bittersweet to them. But it could have simply been a fact of, well, we always expected to die, we just didn't think we'd have to work so hard in the middle of our life. And then being laid to rest would not have seemed quite so ironic to us. You know, going to the earth from which we've been created would have been fine. It wouldn't have been bitter because of the sweat of our brow. But there was no conclusive answer on that particular topic. My own personal leanings is towards the second theory, that death was always going to be a part of life, but that their life becomes much harder because of their transgression. Okay, snake time. And we need to get a little help on this. As you know, I like to normally bring multiple commentaries, but I've been assisted greatly for today's discussion, because we've got one very, very long commentary from one person, Abarbanel, who was from the Middle Ages in Spain, that summarizes most of the other opinions on this topic. So his summary and critique is a very good starting place for our discussion. Okay? Okay, so all of this is one guy, Abarbanel. Actually, his full commentary is longer. I cut it down a little bit here and there. So who would like to be Spanish commentator for the day? You don't have to speak with a Spanish accent. It's okay. Please. Yep, straight up. The 28th question.
The 28th question is in what the scripture state that the snake spoke, seduced, and tempted Hava.
Okay, so we are coming back to our great question. what is this snake? Because to understand the nature of the transgression and the consequences of the transgression, you can't do it without unraveling the mystery of the snake. Chava and Adam, they were doing what they were doing, and we can argue about why they did it and what happened and such, but it's not astonishing. It's just a matter of debate. A talking snake is, as we talked about before, a pretty unprecedented act in the Tanakh. We've got a talking donkey, and that gets a lot of argument in its place too, and we've got a really big fish, but apart from that, animals are not main characters. So to understand the seemingly crucial theological incident, we have to tackle the snake. Does that make sense? And it's speaking in particular.
And this is extremely astonishing thing. For the snake was not one possessing a nefesh.
It didn't have a soul, right? I mean, we don't normally consider snakes to have souls. And it only seems that God gave a soul to Adam and Chava. So if it doesn't have a soul, how could it be carrying on a conversation? Right? Keep going.
Nor did it speak. If so, how did it seduce and tempt? For seducing and tempting is only the giving of advice and suggestion in the tempting matter, with theories of proof giving seduction to the tempted. And behold, advice and suggestion are drawn from the intellectual power, as the philosopher in Sefer Hamidot explained.
All right, so Abravanel goes a little theoretical here. He says, in order to tempt or seduce someone, as opposed to force, you have to use the powers of persuasion, right? I mean, that's what tempting and seduction means. I mean, if the snake had simply held Chava down and shoved the fruit in her mouth, it would have been a very different story. It doesn't say he forced her to do it. It doesn't say he tricked her by painting the fruit a different color. It says that he tempted her. He seduced her. That takes power of thought, of persuasion, of intellect, which snakes don't have. Right? When was the last time you were in your garden and a snake came over and tempted you to do something? Yeah, it might have scared you. It might have scared you, and that's not exactly tempting you to run away, though. And certainly that individual snake didn't do anything. It's the snakiness that made you run away. So Abarbanel is really surprised, and we should be as well, that there's a talking snake that is engaging in very unsnake-like activities. Remember, the Bible is not meant to be Aesop's fables. It is not meant to be just a book of wild and fanciful stories. It's meant to be taken much more seriously than that, and therefore anything that happens in it which seems out of the realm of normal worldly operations has to be understood as something other than literary device. Keep going.
And one cannot answer that the snake in the beginning of his creation possessed intellect, and that the one who placed it in Adam placed it in him. As Ibn Ezra.
Ibn Ezra, that's another commentator. So Ibn Ezra's position is, no. You have to understand, snakes were, back then, they were super animals. They did have the power of speech along with their legs and the ability to eat things other than dirt. And that was what they used to be like. So when a snake is talking, we shouldn't be surprised, because snakes used to talk. That was what it meant to be a snake at the beginning of creation, 5,773 years ago. However, Abarbanel says no. For behold.
Oh, okay. For behold, Scripture encompass it under the category of that it did not speak. When it said, and the snake was more clever than all the animals of the field, thereby grouping them all in one category.
So Abarbanel says, super schmooper, it says, Chayat HaSadeh, that it was the cleverest of the animals of the field. The cleverest animal isn't human. The cleverest animal is a really, really clever animal. And the difference between animals and humans for Abarbanel is that humans are possessed of a reasoning intellect, despite what we may think of other people's fashion choices, that makes them different than humans, and that no animal is capable of seduction, temptation, and persuasion. They're capable of lots of other things, and the cleverest among them would be capable of many things, but not reasoning through, what can I use to convince this person to do this thing? That's Abarbanel's position. Since God describes it in the Torah as being the cleverest of that group, it is still limited by the definition of that group, animal.
Furthermore, if the snake possessed intellect and spoke, and with it seeing its intelligence and speech were taken away from it, and it became mute, the scripture should have mentioned this within its curses, for this in truth will be the greatest of them.
So Barbanel goes on to say, look, if it had been a super animal before, and after the whole fruit thing, it lost its superness, that's why snakes don't go around talking to us nowadays, that should have been top of the list of the things it lost. I mean, you're telling me about it going on its belly and being stamped on by people and then eating dirt? How about lost the ability to be rational creature? That should have been the number one item on the list of curses, if it simply was that snakes used to be super and now they're not. But the Torah doesn't mention losing any super intellectability. Super intellectability, it's a great word. Doesn't mention losing that, so therefore it didn't have it, according to Abarbanel. How are we feeling so far? Between Ibn Ezra and Abarbanel, who thinks Ibn Ezra is still right? Snakes used to be super smart, transgression happened, they lost their super smarts. Anyone on Ibn Ezra's side? I don't see a lot of hands. People convinced that Abarbanel's argument against Ibn Ezra sounds pretty reasonable, right? That snakes probably were never super smart, as if they were, it wouldn't have been called an animal, and it would have been mentioned that they lost it. Okay? Sorry, Ibn Ezra, you can't always be right.
No.
Keep going. He's right lots of other times, so.
One should also not maintain like the which the Gabaon Rabenu Sadia wrote. And there were drawn after him the scholars of the nations, that the Satan spoke and not the snake. And that so was the matter by the she-donkey of Balaam, that she did not speak of her own accord, but rather that the angel of Hashem spoke within her mouth.
Okay, so he's arguing this down here was Ibn Ezra. And up here he's saying the position that the speaker was actually Satan and the snake was just a mouthpiece is the position of, we'll just do Sazia Gaon. And he says, doesn't buy it. He doesn't buy that the snake was Satan or that it was Satan's voice animating the snake or whatever. Because?
For if the matter were so, the snake would not have seen and should not have been punished. And the situation of the Satan speaking within the mouth of the snake, it is in the truth something
unimaginable.
Rather, it is nonsense, the result of delusion.
So he's kind of maybe sort of disagreeing? No. Unimaginable, delusional, ridiculous, snake was not Satan. Because if it was just the mouthpiece of Satan, then why did it get punished in the way that it did? Because if it was Satan doing all the talking, who should have gotten punished? Satan. And yet it says the snake was punished with the whole crawling on the ground, eating dirt, and being stomped on thing. And that doesn't exactly sound like the punishments of Satan. So the snake is the actor, not Satan, according to Abarbanel. Now again, Sadia Gaon, no slouch. You know, his name is Hagaon, which means the genius. It's an official title, but it also does aptly describe so much of what he accomplished in his life. Are we still going down the Satan road, or does it seem like a pretty good argument here from Abarbanel that calling the snake Satan seems a little bit of a stretch. Bit of a stretch? Maybe?
Okay, yeah, then, so it was not Satan who was speaking behind.
According to Abarbanel, no. According to Sadia Gaon, yes.
Okay.
Which is the wonderful world of Jewish debate and discussion and scholarship, which is we will often find multiple opinions. But our job, individually, and as a group in argumentation, is to weigh the different opinions and see which one seems more compelling, which one seems to have the better proof, the better arguments, the better correlation to the text. And in this particular category, I agree with the Barbanel as well. I think trying to call the snake Satan is stretching the story to match an alternative theology, an idea of Satan having a vested interest in causing us to sin, which I'm not entirely sure was the original theological intent of the character of Satan in the Tanakh at all. So, let's go ahead and see the next alternative.
One also cannot say that the snake's speech was by way of a miracle. For Hashem will not make miracles in a wondrous way for an evil purpose. And also because the scripture does not say in the matter of the snake. And God opened the mouth of the snake as it stated by the chief as of Balaam, because it was wondrous occurrence.
All right, so in the story of Balaam, in the Parashat Balak, it says explicitly, and God opens the mouth of the donkey, right? In the book of Genesis, chapter 3, we just read, does it say, and God opens the mouth of the snake? No. So therefore, the whole miracle explanation is a bit tricky. And on top of that, this is sort of under that angel category here, on top of that, not only does it not get miracle introduction statement, it also isn't for a good thing. The donkey talking to Balaam was for a good reason. It was trying to convince Balaam of the right way to go and of the right thing to do. The snake talking to Chava is patently to go against what God has commanded. Are we really going to entertain the notion, says Abarbanel, that God would lend his miraculous ability to transform nature in order that a bad thing happen? Does that sound like God? According to Abarbanel, no. And again, on this particular case, I agree with him. This is why I brought him. This summarizes my arguments against these other commentaries very well, better than I could have. So, calling it a miracle, there's no introductory statement, and it's for an evil purpose. God doesn't go around making miracles for bad, evil things. And calling it a super snake before, that's no longer super, should have been listed as one of the things it lost. And besides, it's called an animal. Calling it Satan, just why does the snake get punished if it was Satan? Sounds good so far?
Yes.
Okay.
Rabbi, then hear me here. Then it was not God who opened the mouth of the snake.
That's what Abarbanel?
It was according to Gabon.
According to Abarbanel, where we are saying it wasn't a super snake that had the natural ability to speak, and it wasn't Satan using the snake as a loudspeaker, and it wasn't an angel or a miracle of God making the snake talk.
Okay.
So we are being backed into a corner now,
Okay.
where we're saying, then how did the thing talk?
So, okay.
You know, okay, the whole problem we began with was a talking snake. And Abarbanel is systematically removing explanations of why a snake might be described as talking. Which is going to leave us with the question of, then how did it talk? Well, we'll get to his answer, and we can argue about whether we like his answer, but we have one more other answer that he's going to shoot down.
Okay. There is also the Rambam of the Moreh Nebuchim.
So this is Rambam, who wrote Moreh Nebuchim, the guide for the perplexed, and this is his explanation, despite my mistyping there. There is also the opinion of the Rav, and when he says the Rav, he means Rambam.
And those who hold of his covenant, that the plan...
That's the Peshat, the plain meaning.
Plain Peshat, meaning of this biblical text is nothing that at all, but it's only hint remes of the natural and spiritual sciences.
Okay, so let me just make sure we understand what he's saying. He's saying there's one option that we didn't list when we started, and that's the snake is metaphorical. There was no snake. It was just a metaphor. There was no snake, the events never took place, and the description that is contained within the Tanakh is just a metaphorical allegory there to teach you eternal spiritual and theological truths, and any relationship between it and people or snakes living and dead is purely coincidental. It never happened. It's just a remez. It's just a hint at the true nature of reality, theology, God, sin, and all that good stuff. And it's just put together as a metaphor. So therefore, snakes can talk in metaphors, no problem, right? Because they're not violating the natural order of things. However, Abarbanel doesn't like that answer.
For I have already informed you that it is not fitting to deny one narrative entirely, which the simple, straightforward meaning of the verses of the Torah testifies to.
Okay, so Abarbanel has a problem with this. Why? Anyone able to decipher his terminology there?
He doesn't like the idea that the Peshat is meaningless.
Yeah. He doesn't, if the Peshat can work, if the straightforward, simple meaning of the text makes a story that actually is plausible, is possible, then he wants to believe that it happened. If the straightforward meaning of the text was impossible, okay, fine. Then we need to interpret it as being an allegory, as being a metaphor for something more. But if you can make the story work the way it's written, stick with the story and also look for other meanings and deeper interpretations, but stick with the story too. However, there's still a problem. What would be the holdup of just saying, you know, the story can work the way it's written?
We still have the talking snake.
There's still a talking snake!
Yes.
Okay, so thank you, Abarbanel, for saying that if you can make the simple narrative work, we should always stick with it, and you can use other interpretation, but we need to have the narrative stand on its own 2 feet or slither. But if it's a talking snake, I can't accept that as being a legitimate, simple Peshat narrative, because that's not the way the world works. And we already ruled out it wasn't God making him talk, and it wasn't Satan making him talk, and he wasn't a super snake. So how's Abarbanel going to get us out of this? How is he, because he wants to keep the narrative as being a legitimate event, not just a metaphor. How is he going to get us a snake that talks when he's shot down all the options we've had so far?
Shot down the angel.
What's that? No, he did shoot down the angel. He shot down the angel / miracle,
Oh, okay.
because it would be a miracle for evil, and God doesn't roll that way.
It doesn't work that way.
Exactly. And besides, when we had another miracle of an animal talking, it said explicitly, and God opened the mouth of the donkey. And we don't get that in chapter 3 about the snake. So that's his argument against that. So really this whole plotter would come down here with the super snake. That gets run out as well. The Satan idea is run out. He doesn't like metaphor. We can keep metaphor if you like, because Rambam did, and you're in very good company if you agree with Rambam. But for Abarbanel, he doesn't like the metaphor. He doesn't like the idea that it might have been Satan. Doesn't like that it was the super snake plotter. Doesn't like that it was an angel.
Looks like we're left with it being an regular animal.
We're left with it being a regular animal.
And that one can't talk.
But animals don't talk. He already went through that, right? He told us the main thing about animals is that they don't talk. Well, talk how? Sandy, would you like to pick up at the bottom of the page? Since you asked the question, you can give us the answer.
I don't have that.
No, read. Bottom of the page.
The snake did not speak at all to the woman, nor the woman to it.
Dun, dun, dun. They didn't talk.
Okay. Imagination.
Well, let's see what we got.
For it is not a man of words, and therefore the biblical text does not say in its matter, and Hashem opened the mouth of the snake, as it is said by the she-ass of Balaam. For there, because the she-ass spoke in the plain sense, and it was a wondrous thing. But by the snake, it does not say that he opened his mouth because it did not speak at all, not in a natural way nor via a miracle.
Okay, so he's just making sure we understand none of these erasers are working. Just a second. Need to drive home this point. None of these other explanations work. It didn't talk either the way we talk, like an animal, like a creature, and it didn't talk through a miracle or through Satan. It was just an animal. So how do we say that it talked? Keep reading.
Rather, the matter was that she saw the snake climb the Eitz Hadat
The Eitz Hadat, the tree of knowledge.
and eat of its fruits, time after time. It did not die nor suffer harm in any fashion. And the woman thought regarding this and considered within herself as if she was speaking with the snake. And so it was, when he climbed the tree and it ate from its fruit, he was saying to her, "You will not die." As it was also in her thought process, it refers to her speech about this. And this is along the lines of Job, who teaches us more than the beasts of the earth and makes us wiser than the fowls of heaven. For she made her thought processes and inquiries from the actions of the snake. And these are the very things that the biblical text are used in.
All right, so how did the snake talk?
Didn't talk.
Just
Didn't
their
talk.
actions.
By its actions. And she watched the actions and went, you know, we're not supposed to eat from that tree or even touch it. But day after day, I see that snake going up that tree and touching the fruit or maybe even eating the fruit. I wonder, it's like it's telling me it's okay. It's like the snake is talking to me.
So we conclude
So?
then that they did this on their own willing.
So we're running out of time, so let me give you the quick skivvy for the rest of the page is Abarbanel supporting this idea. That he is trying to say the Bible often talks about animals talking when they're not really talking. And he even includes other cases where he talks about the earth talking, when obviously the earth can't speak, it doesn't have a mouth. He says nothing wrong with thinking that the Bible uses the word speak for things that aren't actually making vocal cord vibrations. That's normal. But what is interesting of what he's trying to say here is in fact he's putting more blame on us than traditionally would have been given to the serpent. Because it was Chava and then Adam willing to follow her example or her persuasion that the tree was fine based upon their own reasoning, based upon their own interpretation of what they were witnessing in the natural phenomenon. And this idea is actually something that we continue to make, to do today. It's the natural fallacy. That if something is natural, it must be okay. Right? How many times have you heard someone say, oh, well, it's natural. It's natural to want this. It's natural to feel this way. It's natural to react like that. As though somehow that is an excuse for bad behavior. Right? I mean, it's natural for men to want to sow some wild oats. And therefore we excuse promiscuity. It's natural to want to hit someone, when they've insulted you. So we excuse violence. Well, if you've been treated badly by your boss, it's just natural to take home pens or papers or office supplies, because it's just natural to feel like you need to do something like that, to get your own back, to get balance. It's natural to get so excited at a party that you drink too much and then you drive home. It's natural. No. It may be natural to do it, but it's not right. I mean, when we look at other things from the animal world, and we see animals that are promiscuous, we see animals that gorge themselves, we see animals that cheat and steal from each other, which animals are we going to use to decide what is natural? Because there are also animals out there that are monogamous, and there are also animals out there that don't steal, and there are also animals out there that help each other. Well, that's natural too, right? And yet when we use the term, it's only natural, we are usually using it to justify what we've already decided we wanted to do. And we're using the phrase natural as an excuse. that somehow it was how I was made and I can't avoid behaving in this way, because it's just the laws of nature. And who am I to break the law? Well, God in Bereishit is starting from day 1, well, day 7, starting off by telling us just because something looks natural, looks like the way things should just happen, I am asking you to behave differently. I'm asking you to behave better than nature. So that is what will set you aside from the animals of the field, from the shrewdest of the shrewd. He goes on to explain the shrewdness of the snake was simply the fact that it knew it could go up and climb up the tree and get the fruit, and the other animals of the field hadn't figured that out yet. You know, it could get new sources of food. Oh, that's very clever for an animal. We should know that just because you can get something doesn't mean you should take it. Because we should be following a law that elevates us much higher than the laws of nature. We should be following the laws of Torah, which was the whole purpose of the gift of Torah in the first place. And one reason, at least, why the Torah begins with this story, rather than having left it just shrouded in the mists of time. So it wanted to remind us, just because something feels right, just because something looks not right, just because something seems natural, and just because you see examples from the animals, doesn't mean it's the right thing to do. It may be right for animals to do that, we're not going to judge them, but that doesn't mean we use it as precedent for human behavior.
And why a snake?
But why a snake? The snake was the one doing it. We've attached a great deal of significance to the snakiness, but the snake was the one doing it. It was clever. It was able to figure out how to get in and get that food, as snakes do. You know, they can go through those little cracks and find food everywhere. So it was a wonderful example of looking at the intelligence of an animal and thinking it could teach us something.
So
Animals can teach us some things. They can't teach us morality.
So she did not get punished?
What's that?
Snake, she did not get punished.
So the snake does still get punished, and that becomes a question, it's a much longer part of Abarbanel, where it's a question of, are we responsible for others modeling their behavior on us? And that's a much more contentious issue. But that hopefully we'll discuss another day. So I hope everyone is here on Shabbat. Just remember, we get to read a lot more about Bereishit this week in the synagogue, and I hope everyone also remembers and continues to take to heart that there's a lot more to the Torah than just what we discuss here, and please do continue to read on your own as well. Take care, everyone.